Hello and welcome to the DMA Politics podcast. I'm Michael Sturrock, the Public Affairs Manager at the DMA. Today we are talking about misinformation online and more specifically about misinformation in relation to the coronavirus pandemic. And the reason for that is that a new fact-checking service called Infotagion has been set up by the Conservative backbench MP and former chair of the Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee, Damian MP, along with the founder of Iconic Labs and co-founder of Unilad, Liam Harrington, who I'm delighted to say are both joining me from their respective homes today. Hello to you both.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
And we're also joined by John Nicolson MP, who is the SNP Shadow Secretary of State for DCMS and one of the parliamentary supporters of the group. And John is also a journalist and a broadcaster, so we're keen to get his views on the topic as well. Thanks all for joining me. Hello to you as well, John.
Hello.
Hello. Right, Liam, I wanted to get started with you before we let the politicians loose. Let's start at the beginning. How did your teaming up with Damian happen and the creation of Infotagion come to be? And what is the problem it's designed to help solve?
Well, I think it was, first and foremost, there was a mutual understanding that there's multiple issues to address within the sort of digital landscape as a whole. I think obviously with Damian's knowledge and previous history, we kind of, and obviously my previous history within the social media and digital world, it kind of seemed like an obvious partnership. I kind of put myself down there as an on-the-ground foot soldier, as it were. So I kind of get to see everything that's going on and the movements that are being made within the digital landscape. And Damian obviously has access to, a lot of people that previously I would have never had the chance to speak to. And some of the stuff that we've seen in the past kind of 8 years that I've been doing this, we've had so many questions and wondered, why can we never work with someone who's like-minded, who sits in a position of, sort of power to be able to actually address these issues? So on a kind of met through a mutual friend, Damian and I, and we came up with the idea of combating fake news through digital. Now, I think, as I said, with everything going on in the current climate, it's vital that we address these issues, because there are some things going on at the moment that are far worse, potentially far worse than the actual virus itself. And I know we're here, I know Infotagion is focusing on COVID-19, but as I said, some of the stuff that we've seen is potentially far worse than what is going on actually in the world. It's tough.
And Damian, you've obviously got a lot of experience in tackling the misinformation issue. You chaired the investigation into the misinformation and fake news. Is there something about the misinformation about coronavirus that makes it worse than run-of-the-mill misinformation in regards to anything other than you might see online, or is it purely because the stakes are higher with coronavirus that it makes it particularly insidious?
Well, I think we're seeing this is the first major public health emergency in the era of social media disinformation. And disinformation can be deadly in that context. We've seen already stories of people who have lost their lives or have been hospitalized because they've tried to take a drug or a chemical that they believe would cure them of COVID-19. We saw the extraordinary situation in the last few days of people attacking phone masts and abusing telecoms workers in the street because they believed a conspiracy theory online that coronavirus has been caused by 5G. So we see that it's not just about a bit of tittle-tattle and amusing content people share through social media. It's designed to influence the way people behave and change behavior. And that can have disastrous consequences. So a lot of the debate in the last few years around disinformation has really been in the election interference space. But I think what we've seen here is just how dangerous it is when you overlay that across a public health emergency.
And there sort of seems to be, you touched upon it there seems to be kind of two types of misinformation. There's the more insidious type, which is deliberately designed to try and cause harm, but there's also the kind of hearsay that you might get from your auntie or something on Facebook who has heard something from a friend who thinks something is the case. But that second type of misinformation seems to be quite prevalent within the coronavirus conversation. Do you think there's a reason for that?
Well, I think it's because it's a very fast-moving issue. This is a disease that didn't exist not that long ago, and we still don't have a cure for it, and we don't really quite understand how it all works. And against that, you've got a background of the government introducing new measures all of the time. So it's not surprising that people are searching for information. And when we were doing this as well, I mean, in the Select Committee inquiry, we looked in particular at platforms like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube for disinformation. I think in this coronavirus situation, WhatsApp and text messaging is also really important as well. And what you see there is people receiving messages that say, you know, my friend who works for the NHS, or my friend who knows an academic who works in this hospital overseas says this is what they've discovered and you need to share this quickly because this is really important. And that could be a conspiracy theory about the way the virus spreads, false information about how you can protect yourself from it. And that is also very damaging too, because anything that misleads people about what they need to do to keep themselves safe during a situation like this is potentially harmful. So I think we've seen this before with some of the anti-vaccine campaigns online, particularly around things like the MMR jab, and that has undoubtedly led to children dying of measles because they weren't vaccinated properly. What we're seeing now is with coronavirus, a whole mass of fake stories out there which are designed to mislead people. Some of them being spread maliciously, some of them maybe being spread for people to try and make money, but just by creating viral content. But there's a lot of it out there, and we need to make it really, I think what we need to achieve is a mindset change for people with this. That when they see something that doesn't look right, their first instinct is to check it, to go to a service like infotagion, get it checked out, get the correct results, but then crucially, not just hold that knowledge to themselves, but share that back. And I think in this environment, accuracy is important, but advocacy is even more important. That's one of the reasons why I was so keen to work with Liam and his colleagues on this as well, because they are experts in actually seeing content spread through social media, and that's what we want to do here. We want people to send stuff to us so we can check it, but then we want the results to spread back out.
Well, fundamentally, just to add to that point, fundamentally, it's a behavioural issue as well. We are a fickle group of people, whereby we would much rather share bad news than good news. That's always been the case on social media. Social media and digital, the bad news has always got the clicks, and it's sad. It really isn't good. So let's take the 5G, for example. There has been, even my mum is getting involved in the act about 5G. But so that's been spread hundreds and thousands of times. But what hasn't been spread is the fact that there's only 5 countries with 5G masts. I think there's far more countries with COVID-19 than that. So, no one's spreading that news, and that is the news that needs to be spread. But almost, it's like an antidote, really, isn't it? You sort of need the fake news to come out and be controlled for the antidote to then come in and just eat away at it. But you need power behind the antidote. You need people. So that's where I think Damian and I work very well together. It's because he can make me aware of the news that is spreading, the fake news that is spreading. And then I can hopefully come in with my networks and the people that I know within the digital landscape and sort of say to them all, stop, be socially responsible, talk to me, talk to infotagion, and let's actually start spreading the truth. Let's spread the facts rather than the false.
Mm-hmm. Well, carrying on the fact subject, and we'll come on to how infotagion actually works in a little bit. But John, I was keen to have your input because of your long and distinguished career in journalism, and this question will be relevant to how infotagion goes about fact checking as well. So come to the others afterwards. But as a journalist, it's your job, obviously, to source true information to reports that's validated by yourself, and then you transmit it as accurately as possible. Yet one of the issues with coronavirus is that while it's certainly a moving situation, but the conversations around it are scientific, but they're kind of still working on a kind of best case knowledge scenario. And there's been cases where the best case scientific knowledge has been advertised or publicly announced, but then turns out to be not quite true, or is developed in a couple of days beyond that, or just not originally what we thought it was. So, for example, there was some people were saying, or there was a study, in fact, into how long coronavirus lives on packaging that people receive through their doors, and it turns out it only survives on cardboard and packaging for an hour or so, whereas before everyone was petrified because one study showed that it was coming through the door and could live there for 24 hours. So all of a sudden, post became this massive threat, which is kind of completely false. But it was a process of scientific validation that led to that being misproved. Yet at the time, we thought it was the case that post could be this threat of coronavirus. So how does the media how is the media affected by that? Because obviously you have people then saying, oh, the BBC, talk radio, your station, all these trusted news sources are giving misinformation or fake news, and how do you combat that?
Yeah, I noticed a wag on Twitter yesterday saying it's a beautiful day outside, so I think I'll stay in and wash my post. You're right to make a distinction between the malevolent actors out there and people who simply pass on misinformation because it's what their friends have told them. Those are very, very different things. And you look at somebody like David Icke, for example. I remember David Icke from his days as a sportscaster before he became a believer in lizards. Now, David Icke has got a huge following on social media. And when he used to tell people that the royal family were lizards from outer space, ultimately, bizarre but harmless, made him quite rich, I suspect. But it didn't matter. But David Icke telling us all that coronavirus comes from 5G masts, that's on a whole new level. I think it's important to remember that while we as politicians and journalists and folk who are particularly interested in this are absorbing lots of information, a lot of people out there aren't. So I think you've got to keep it very, very simple. The clinical director of Scotland is a man called Jason Leach, with no training in the media whatsoever. I've had him on my talk radio show for the last few weeks with half an hour's worth of just asking him very simple questions. So, for example, the issue about how long the virus lives on packaging, I didn't know the answer to that, but it's slightly more complicated than people might think. I discovered through him that it depends how shiny the surface is, apparently. I didn't know that. I've got a O grade in biology and nothing more. But some types of surface, it dies very quickly. Other types of surface, it lasts for a long time. Shiny surfaces, he said, scientists now believe is where it lasts the longest. So I think as journalists, we've got a duty to keep asking simple questions that people can digest and give them simple, credible answers. And that's where politicians and journalists are as at one.
And do you have, at the moment, do you get a lot of constituents emailing in or contacting you? Do they appear to have a good grasp of what information about coronavirus is, or is there a lot of misinformation floating about?
Well, I think one of the problems was the way Parliament behaved weeks ago, because we were telling constituents that we believed that this was spread. It was spread in particles of spittle, that people could be infected by the particles of spittle if they were at close distance. And yet you'd look at the House of Commons and there were MPs crammed together like sardines. Now, why on earth should constituents, I imagine they'll think to themselves, why should we listen to what these politicians are saying when they're behaving in a way that completely contradicts the advice they themselves are giving? So I think politicians played both a good role in disseminating good information early on, or the best information they could get. But the look of the House of Commons didn't sit at all with the information that politicians were trying to spread. So I think at the outset there was conflicting messages which confused people. But now I think the messages have become much clearer. Stay at home, stay with your family, don't go out unless you really need to. I think those messages are really, really clear now. And I noticed that from my post bag. People do seem to have got the message in a way that they hadn't a couple of weeks ago.
And Damian, do you agree with that about Parliament? Was it slow off the mark in how it dealt with coronavirus?
Yeah, but I think Parliament reflected the journey the country went on a bit as well, which is that, we went from seeing this as being a a sort of nasty virus that could be managed in a much more, if you like, casual way than has turned out to be the case. And we've followed a step-by-step process of social distancing, self-isolation, to really requesting that people don't go out at all unless they really have to. So I think Parliament caught up with that a little bit, and we started introducing measures around distancing in the way the chamber works, so only having people in the Prime Minister's questions if they had a question on the order paper to ask, rather than just everyone being there. There have been rules around changing the way we vote to try and make sure that there isn't a cram of people going through the chamber. I'll be very interested to see when Parliament's due to come back after the Easter break, if we go back as a virtual Parliament, and there have been discussions about how that could work. So I could see that both in terms of voting electronically, speaking remotely, using Zoom to ask questions of ministers. It will be interesting to see what we do, but I can't see Parliament going back to business as normal in the next few weeks any more than the country will.
And going back to misinformation more broadly, to what level do you perceive it to be a threat, sort of akin to that to other national security issues? And you've kind of outlined it. Is that threat? And do we now exist in a situation where, you might say the leader of one of our closest allies is responsible for distributing quite a lot of misinformation, particularly on coronavirus? And how does the UK kind of deal with its neighbours and partners and indeed enemies who proliferate misinformation?
Well, firstly, disinformation is a weapon. It always has been, and we used to call it propaganda, but it's it is, and whether it is foreign states. There's been a lot of analysis looking at whether China is seeking to spread confusion over the source and origin of coronavirus and suggesting it might not come from there. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about saying that it came from labs rather than from the market in Wuhan, that it was caused by the Americans who were seeking to blame it on the Chinese. There's a whole series of counter narratives being spread out there. There's a lot of amplification of aid efforts by different countries to help others as well. So there's a lot of politically motivated information around coronavirus online, and therefore I think we have a duty to try and exclude the false from the true, and to warn people of things that are untrustworthy sources of information. And of course we know that Chinese disinformation in Asia and Australasian, Oceania area has been a factor for a number of years, just as Russian disinformation in Europe has been something we've been familiar with over the last few years as well. And it is a lot of that is going to be politically motivated. So I think in some ways there have probably been people that have been blind to that problem in the past that will now really wake up to it, because a public health emergency does make people focus on things in a way they've not done before, because they can see the potential real world impacts of that. I think one of the things that the social media companies have been prepared to do, Twitter in particular, and I congratulate them for this, is actually acting against statesmen whose statements are false. We've seen them Twitter took down the statements from leaders in South America, which were considered to be false and misleading and potentially harmful. And that's right to say, just because this is an open platform, you can't necessarily say what you like if what you say is going to cause harm to others. Donald Trump is in a category of his own in many ways, and in some ways, one of the reasons we don't use the term fake news in the fake news business, if you like, is that it's been so discredited by him, who just uses it as a term for anything he himself doesn't have to agree with. He calls fake news, rather than seeing this as But again, I think we should call people out, and the social media companies should also call out statements that are false, or even take down statements, even if they come from the president of a country.
Well, the comment right. It's a remarkable thing, to have a president in Trump or Bolsonaro, whom Damian referenced there in Brazil, South America's biggest country, who's deliberately spreading false news about the virus in a way that will cause enormous harm to his own people, and it's for re-election purposes. There's no other explanation for it, because a weakened economy reduces Bolsonaro's chances of re-election, and the same goes for Trump. So they both seem to be prepared to sacrifice their own citizens for their personal objectives. It is remarkable. But as Damian says, fake news has become it's an old phenomenon, but in the internet age, it spreads remarkably. It spreads like a virus, doesn't it? And one of the challenges for us, I think, is to work out how we're going to reach out to the people who don't trust what they call the mainstream media. Take the White Helmets, for example, the group of civilians in Syria who run towards the Assad regime bombs and rescue people who've been trapped by the bombs. If you ever tweet, they're heroic, they're being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Independent journalists will verify the work that they do, but they are deeply threatening to Assad and his regime. If you ever tweet anything about them or tweet supportively of them, you'll get bombarded with messages from folk who will tell you that the White Helmets are terrorists, sometimes even from people that I've met, occasionally constituents. And you'll write back and ask them on what basis they're saying that. And they're never able to explain it except to reference some propagandists, internet propagandists, who of course are paid for by Assad and his regime. How do you reach those people who don't trust public service broadcasters or what they call the mainstream media? It's a real challenge.
Well, Liam, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it was more so the fact that the common denominator here is connectivity, where it's a blessing and a curse, and we're sort of masters of our own demise. We've created a world and a society here where we're also connected so easily, which means that unfortunately it's very difficult to control the narrative once it starts spreading. So it goes back to my point about, you have to be able to counter the point. You almost have to let the news happen, but be able to stop it at its earliest given point. So that requires a lot of eyes on. But to try and live in a world where you can now stop news from even entering the digital ecosystem is false. You just simply can't. But what you can do is you can counter it, and that's almost standard PR. That's been going on for years. We've worked with many sort of fast food chains in the past who have encountered problems within their kitchens, for example, and you can't stop the news coming out about someone finding something in their burger, but what you can do is you can come in with lots of positive news and just mute it. You can keep it quiet and stop it from spreading, and then suddenly people will move on to the next thing.
Liam, if I may, on the White Helmets as an example, because the work that they're doing is so heroic, it is such a good news narrative, rescuing children from rubble where bombs have been dropped, where chemical weapons have been dropped, and then the international agencies prove that the chemical weapons have been dropped. How do you manage to persuade perfectly decent citizens in this country that the false narratives that they are hearing are false? Why would they rather listen to some extremist in Damascus rather than a Channel 4 news reporter? Ultimately, that's what I find hard to get.
I agree. The White Helmets is a phenomenal example. Back at UNLAD, we interviewed a few people from the White Helmets, and we just had to we couldn't put the interview out in the end because it was that they were worried about their own safety. It was madness. And obviously, if we had managed to go and spread that news, it would have been great news for them. But at the end of the day, if they've got the threat over their heads of their safety, we would never do that. We would never do that. It's a difficult, but as I said, it is all surround. Look at WhatsApp, for example. So WhatsApp, one of the most common ways that news is being shared at the moment is via the forwarding function. So you simply get a message on your phone, you hit forward, and you forward it to 20 people. WhatsApp know they cannot stop these sort of messages being spread. So what they've done is they've just sort of said, you can only forward now to one person at a time, I think. Which is good, but it doesn't solve the problem. It slows the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem. Because we are quite a savvy bunch of people now. And we all know that all we have to do is go back to the old function on WhatsApp, whereby you download the photo to your phone and you spread it that way. You just can't track that way of spread. You can track the forwarding. You can't track the photo to photo to photo. It's difficult. It is about trying to put as much positive news which is also super interesting into the ecosystem to get that spread. But as I said before, people seem to be more interested in the negative than they are the positive.
So will infotagion, one of its functions, as well as obviously debunking the misinformation that's out there, but will it be a font of correct knowledge that will be firing out as much true and good information as possible?
Absolutely. We have a network of about 40 million. Actually, we have access to about 40 million people within the social ecosystem. So that varies from people who are sort of publishers with websites themselves or Instagram pages, anyone with a voice. So all we're doing is we're going to be speaking to them, and we're going to be saying, listen, if your eyes ever come across something that you don't think is right, or actually just even if you've got 0.01% of a thought that this is not correct, you run it through infotagion, and we'll go and put it out we'll check it, we'll put it out the other side, and then you can go and post it. So whilst we're also doing that, we will be also putting out some positive real news. So the ones that have been, the ones that have been fact checked already on the website, we'll be working them up into nice little digital pictures that can go and be spread. But my plan as well is to also just get a real kind of army within the digital landscape who are willing to kind of say, look, I'm going to sacrifice those couple of million views that I'd get because we need to get through this together. That's what I really require from people. And I'll be
so
I will be able to get that.
Yeah.
Great. How do individuals and businesses get involved?
I've got my own network that I sort of get the ball rolling, and I just encourage people to tell the next person to come and speak to me if they want to get involved. As I said, we do already have a real stronghold in the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, etc. We are good here, but if we want to start spreading it worldwide, then I'll have to kind of work a bit harder there.
Sure.
We've got as well as people. We've got obviously a cross-party parliamentary group of people here, but also parliamentarians in Ireland and in Canada who are supporting this too. And we're developing relationships with think tanks and universities around the world that are part of our supporter base. The one thing we'd say, I think we've had a lot of people come forward since we launched at the end of March, saying, "What can we do to help?" And there's, I think, people from the audience for this podcast. I'd say, we've got some people coming forward who are furloughed staff working for digital agencies who are saying, "Well, I'd be happy to volunteer and help in support infotagion and getting the message out there to use their own networks and their skills to do that." And that's incredibly helpful to us because advocacy around what we do and also getting the true messages out there is really important. And I think one thing that sort of stands out from what we tried to do so far is that if you go onto infotagion, what you'll see is fact checks based on real messages that people have seen. You'll see a screenshot of the WhatsApp message or the post on Instagram that a real person has seen and sent in to us, and our fact checks respond to that. And so obviously we want more people to send stuff in. So it's not just generic advice saying this is what you should believe, and if it doesn't agree with this, then it's not true.
Well, yeah,
it's written in response to what people see.
It is crucial that the posts remain relatable and as they came, sort of thing. So as I see on social media, it has to appear on the website. People need to be able to see that we're not just kind of taking the text and re-uploading it. This is how raw it is. We're listening to people, and we're really fact checking here the actual thing that you're seeing. That post that you're sharing, we're fact checking. Maybe next time think twice about sharing it.
Sure. So one last question before we wrap up. Looking to the future, obviously this is, in an ideal world, this would be how the internet worked as a matter of course. You'd have these kind of functions that you could correct the misinformation online. So how do you see, whether it be, individuals, businesses, legislators, how do you see this problem progressing as we go forward?
Well, if I kick off, so from a legislative point of view, I've argued in the past, and the select committee in the past argued as well, that we should make it an offence for people to sort of knowingly and maliciously spread harmful disinformation. And I would see during a health crisis like coronavirus, spreading disinformation, again, knowingly and maliciously about it, will harm public health, could lead to people losing their lives, and it should be an offence to do it. And I think it should also be an offence for the tech companies not to act against that content if and when they're made aware of it. And for me, that should include not just acting against the content itself, but also if you can identify networks of accounts or groups that are knowingly spreading it as well, then we should act against that too. Now, there's been a long process in Parliament looking at this and discussing the online harms proposals the government put forward. That's not going to be legislated for in the next few weeks. So in the absence of that, I think it's really important that we have campaigns like infotagion that seek to educate people to check what they see and to share the results.
John, anything to add on that?
No, I think it's an interesting idea. The idea that there should be a penalty for spreading this stuff. We all know that the social media platforms were very slow to react to that because they called themselves platforms rather than publishers, and they're clearly publishers. And there's an experience in Germany with Facebook, which is once the German parliamentarians decided that Facebook should be responsible for false content. Facebook in Germany, faced with penalties, suddenly took on lots of editors who would monitor the stuff that was being posted. And that proved to be very effective. I think we've been far too slow in playing a bit heavier with the with Facebook and others in this country. And I think this will be this if nothing else is a wake up call. This is a wake up call because unlike the disinformation around Brexit, which was a political hot potato because Brexiteers were very happy for there to be disinformation on Brexit. With this, it's entirely different because nobody wants disinformation. Well, no mainstream parliamentarian wants disinformation spread over a killer virus.
Liam, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just think on within social and digital. I've been saying it for years. I think there needs to be a governing body or a regulator which sits the level below the owners, so which sits below the Facebooks, Twitters and YouTubes. Someone who will be that foot soldier who can see what the publishers and what the pages and what the influencers and what all these people with the voices are doing and making sure they are being responsible, because there is absolutely nothing. It really is the Wild West out there, and it has been since about 2013. That's when I started seeing it. So someone needs to be able to sit, and whilst, yes, we can blame the Facebooks and the Twitters for perhaps suggesting they could do more, there is a lot of work to be done with the people who are utilising these platforms.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everyone. That's been a really interesting discussion. You can find Infotagion at infotagion.com, I believe. And you're also on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn. And are you on Facebook? I didn't see a...
Yeah, we're on Facebook.
Yeah, thought so. There we go. Great. So, of course, you can see all of that online. And please do get in touch with any of us if you have any questions about what you've heard today. And you'll be able to find everyone on Twitter and via email, etc. online. Thank you very much for listening. And we'll be in touch soon with the next episode of the DMA Politics Podcast. Cheerio.